Could a major cyber attack actually shut down the US electrical grid, or banking sector, or drinking water systems, or cell phone connectivity? There's a lot of confusion and lack of understanding about hacking and cybersecurity threats facing individual Americans, the US government, critical infrastructure, and economy. And how prepared is the US to identify and counter a 9/11 style cyber event? I'm Guy Taylor, National Security Editor at The Washington Times, and this is the special Washington Times Threat Status video series with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a research institute focused on identifying, analyzing, and eliminating U.S. national security threats on the global stage. For this edition, we're lucky to be joined by Samantha Ravich, the chair of FDD's Center on Cyber and Technology Innovation. She has decades of experience working inside and outside the U.S. government on national security and cybersecurity issues. Samantha, when it comes to major cyber attacks, we've had things like solar winds in 2020 that resulted in a massive government sensitive data breach. We also had the Colonial Pipeline attack that shut down gasoline pipeline, especially in the Southeast in 2021. But what about a doomsday cyber event, either by a non-state actor or a foreign adversary group, say Russian, Chinese, North Korean, or Iranian? What would that look like by your definition?
Well, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It would be incredibly ugly. Think about, you wake up in the morning. There are no lights. Go to turn on the tap. There's no water. Somebody in your household perhaps has a medical emergency. You can't call 911. You put them in a car, you get to the hospital is shut down. It can't get on its systems. You need to go to the bank to get money for baby food. The ATM doesn't work. You get to the grocery store, the lights are out, it can't function.
And this would be from hacking systems that all of these things are dependent on simultaneously. That's a 9/11 doomsday scenario.
It is a 9/11 that continues. It's a 9/11 that happens that day and the next day. Because you're right, all of these systems are connected. And that's why I took you through what a very bad day looks like. If I can just tell you, when we think about, I said the banks rely on the telecommunications sector. The telecommunications sector relies on the energy grid. The energy grid might rely on oil and gas. If all of those things had rolling cyber attacks, our way of life and everything that we work off of on the internet, on technology, could be affected at once. That is what a very bad day looks like.
So you have done amazing work with the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. This was originally a congressionally mandated U.S. government body to basically work on what the government's cybersecurity strategy would be writ large, both for a doomsday type scenario like this or smaller things, reorganization of structures within the government. Now the CSC 2.0 is actually run within FDD. You're very involved in it. What is the CSC 2.0 read on how prepared we are for something like that? Are we really aware that it could happen, and are we in a position to counter it or stop it?
Well, I assume by we, you mean both the U.S. government and the American public. And the congressionally mandated Cyberspace Solarium Commission found that we are not prepared, both the U.S. government and the private sector, and in fact, the U.S. public. So one of the top 5 recommendations that became law was something called continuity of the economy planning. That was a direct recommendation from the commission that the administration was going to have to start thinking through. What does that mean? If that doomsday scenario happened, what would get online first? What is the most important things that would have to protect us?
Sort of day after plan.
Or day of and day after. But as you do the planning for day of, day after, it makes you more resilient day before. We, the commission, recommended it. It became law. Unfortunately, the administration said back to Congress, no worries, we've got it under control. They do not have it under control. It is not being done. It must be done.
But if a foreign actor, hacker, or a non-state hacker infiltrated operational systems, that the electrical grid or water systems, pipelines, if that happened, are we in a position to actually detect it, for instance, now, compared to, say, 5 years ago? Are we actually able to see what's going on and counter it? We being the private sector and the U.S. government.
So it is happening all the time. Electric grids are constantly being infiltrated and attacks are being repelled, but not always. Same with water, same with other critical infrastructure. Yes, there are tools and techniques to better see where the adversary is coming in, but it really varies by sector. So banking is very good, but still vulnerable. The electric grid is very good, but still vulnerable. And then you get to things like the water utilities. There are over 70,000 water utilities in the United States, stemming from very large ones to small infrastructure that might serve 500 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people. Unfortunately, over the last decade, more and more technology was put in place to cut costs and make it easier and perhaps more efficient. But this technology holds in it the vulnerabilities. People didn't change their passwords. The technology came from China, whatever. There were vulnerabilities built into our critical infrastructure. We have not closed those gaps. We have not made those vulnerabilities go away. We are not prepared as a country to deal with a rolling series of major cyber attacks from adversaries.
One of the things that the Pentagon Cyber Command Chief, Paul Nakasone, who is also the director of the NSA, has talked about publicly is this idea of living off the land. This is very confusing to even senior national security journalists to try and explain to the general public or congressional staffers. What does that mean, living off the land? A hacker living off the land within the system, or game that out for me?
Living off the land just means that the attackers find a way into the system and plant there, and you as the system owner don't see anything different. Nothing gets shut down. Everything seems to be working fine until it isn't, until the moment in time when the adversary actually wants to launch the attack. So it sits there, it waits, and it doesn't take anybody to download malware. Maybe it just steals credentials. They steal credentials, they get on in a somewhat of a non-nefarious type of way, but now they're in the system and they wait for the moment. The living off the land, they're living in your system as if everything is fine, but it isn't fine.
Conceivably, you're saying Russian intelligence could have contracted hackers who've made their way into a critical infrastructure system like water systems, are in that network as we speak, haven't been detected, and are just hanging out there.
Sure, that is absolutely a not just a possibility, a probability that is occurring. The reason why it's so worrisome is because your systems don't detect that there's a problem. They don't detect that malware, something new, has been inserted on the system. Your systems seem to be working fine. But the adversary's inside the house. Kind of, we trace the call, it's coming from inside the house. You know, the old horror movie line. They're inside the house, but no red flags have gone up until they want to launch their attack.
Interesting. I want to shift here because I know your expertise is actually, it's very broad with this. It's not just doomsday discussions. Let's look at foreign adversaries that use cyber to make money. A little bit of international banking. For me, maybe the best example documented by the U.S. intelligence community or within the national security community is North Korea. This idea of North Korean criminal sovereignty, funding the North Korean government by hacking operations, or does that actually mean that there are countries like North Korea that have operatives that are stealing money from the international banking system, or how does that actually work? That something like Bank of America or a large, well-known U.S. banking institution, or a European bank or Asian bank, African bank, Latin American bank could be penetrated and have money stolen? Or is it a little bit more complicated than that?
So it surprises a lot of people about how capable the North Koreans are, right? They're the hermit kingdom. They're isolated. You know, the people have to eat tree
They have a
bark.
very old-fashioned image.
Exactly, and so it shocks people to realize that they are a cyber adversary powerhouse. And where they have decided to focus, it seems, is in the crypto market, which benefits them really well because crypto and cryptocurrency was created for anonymity. And, you know, it's very hard for oftentimes U.S. law enforcement, U.S. intelligence agencies to have a full laydown of what is going on in the crypto market worldwide, unlike the regular traditional banking system. So North Korea has become incredibly well suited and very vicious in stealing money and be able to siphon off from the cryptocurrency markets. What do they do with it? It goes to fund their missile program. It goes to fund their nuclear program. I honestly think the U.S. government, we do not understand the depths of how much the North Koreans are benefiting from their thefts in the cryptocurrency world to fund their nukes and their missiles. North Korea is one of the most heavily sanctioned countries in the world, and yet their proliferation of nuclear and missile technology continues at an escalating pace. Right? So we may not, in fact, I would hazard a guess, we do not understand fully how much North Korea is siphoning off from the crypto markets, particularly. They've tried other things, Bangladesh Bank, and other
so there
things.
are examples
of more traditional
fraud almost, using
more traditional banks.
Hacking information about individual citizens who are banking with a bank, then using that to fraud the bank out of a transfer.
Indeed.
That happens as well.
Absolutely.
Although to a lesser degree.
Absolutely.
And
That's
is
correct.
that something that's a threat, if it's a non-state actor, for instance, to U.S. banks? Or are U.S. banks buttoned up to a point where that's not a major issue right now?
They're buttoned up to a point. The amount of trial and error and new tactics and techniques that adversary state or state affiliated, in the case of Russia and their state affiliated hackers, going after our banking system, the international banking system, credit cards, money transfer payments, payday payments. They know it's not just to steal money. It can really cause havoc and terror in a country if you don't trust your banking system. North Korea actually tried this against South Korea about a decade ago.
Triggering fear.
Triggering fear, sowing fear and terror in the lead up to a bigger attack, or just to prove that we are vulnerable and they can do what they wish.
So here we are in a U.S. election year. We have the U.S. presidential election coming. This elusive cyber threat is looming in the backdrop. I'm wondering whether the U.S. government is really prepared at this point. We've stood up the Cyber Threat Intelligence Integration Center in 2015. U.S. Cyber Command has been around since 2010. In 2018, within the Department of Homeland Security, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, I'm getting into a little bit of an acronym soup with what looks like a lot of entities within the executive branch that have stood up in the last decade-ish. I'm wondering if this is actually comparable to a 9/11 situation, when in the years prior to 9/11, there were a lot of silos in the U.S. intelligence community, specifically regarding the global terrorist threat, that left us a little bit unprepared for a 9/11 style event. Do you have a concern that that's where we are right now with cybersecurity?
I have a great concern. The Cyberspace Solarium Commission recommended, and it was stood up, something called the Office of the National Cyber Director in the White House that was kind of supposed to see across. The jury is out as to whether or not it's actually going to do what the commission recommended and that thought needed to be done. But there's a few things. There's certainly the sharing and the understanding of intelligence throughout the U.S. government so that we can be prepared and also go on the offense. There are the serious offensive capabilities, which Cyber Command, which you referenced, certainly has some. And then there are what's called the sector-specific agencies, different parts of the U.S. government that are there to help their, let's just say, the parts of the private sector that they work with most closely. And on this, there is some good news. The Department of Energy has created something called the Operational Technology Fellowship, where the Department of Energy is working with electric companies, oil and gas, pipelines, to help harden their operational technology, which are the big machines that make things work, right? This is a real program that we are proud to participate in. Idaho National Lab participates in it as well. But it is really moving the needle to make the infrastructure that uses operational technology harder, more resilient, and to be able to withstand the attacks that are coming fast and furious.
One of the things that you mentioned is offensive capabilities, that within the scope of U.S. government capabilities, cyber command at the Pentagon, there are offensive capabilities. My question is, how do the U.S. offensive capabilities compare to adversaries, for instance, North Korea or China or Iran? Those are the usual suspects with cyber threats, but non-state actors as well. Are we really behind, or are we more advanced?
Well, without getting into very specifics, we're very good. The problem, though, is with cybersecurity and offensive cybersecurity, you have to be able to show how good you are in order to have a deterrent. In cybersecurity, there's nothing akin to above-ground nuclear tests, right? So when we wanted to show the Soviets that you better, behave because we have a robust nuclear weapons arsenal, we could have an above-ground nuclear test on our own territory. It was not escalatory. It wasn't over Moscow. But they knew what our capabilities are.
What is the equivalent to that with the cyber?
We haven't yet figured this out. We're not about to flicker the lights in Beijing. That's a bit escalatory. We don't want to flicker the lights in one of our own cities. That's just dumb. So we are struggling, I think, to be able to showcase just how good we are. And when we do things against certain adversaries, we don't always want to take credit, which also makes sense on the one hand, but doesn't necessarily deter other actors. So we're still trying to figure out this new landscape.
The U.S. government, for instance, has never commented on whether or not failed North Korean missile tests over the years have been a result of offensive operation.
Absolutely.
Samantha Ravich, thank you so much for informing us and joining me for this part of the special video series. I'm Guy Taylor, the National Security Editor at the Washington Times. Until next time.